It's January 20th, 2019. We're at Packard Oaks Farm. Dad's going to tell about this walrus hunting trip in Alaska.
Yeah, that happened towards the end of our 2 year training, 2 years of service there in Nome, Alaska, as a dentist for the U.S. Public Health Service. And one of the, actually there was two villages out there on that island of St. Lawrence. It's an island between Alaska and Russia, Alaska and Japan, kind of. It's way up there. And we flew into the first village and then went by dog team out to the other village. That was an interesting trip too, because we kind of got lost in the mountains on that island. It's a big island, St. Lawrence Island is, and the guys on the dog team would stop and dig down to find out if they were on the ocean or on the land, because you can't tell after the winter hits really heavy. Anyway, I kept telling him we ought to go to the right because we knew we were lost, and finally we went. We made a great big circle on that mountainside, and ended up going back to the town village that we actually just came from, and because what happened is we found those great big 55-gallon drums where they bring them in with oil, and they never ship the empty ones back out, but they use them to mark the trail. And all of a sudden, the drums were on our left side instead of on the right side, and so we knew we were going back to the village. And so we turned around and followed the drums right on the beach, is where the trail was. The reason that we went up into the mountains is because the dog's feet started to bleed. This was in the spring of the year, and when the ice thaws, it creates a crust on the top as the snow and ice, and then refreezes at night. And when the dogs was running, they breaks through the little crust and cuts their little feet, and they start to bleed. And so we went higher into the mountain where they could get it would stop the bleeding and didn't have that little crust on it. And so anyway, we went back down to the beach and came on in and found the trail and made it in. And that particular village, I think, was Savunga, and we had some time after doing all the dental work, and they said I wanted to go on a walrus hunt, and so he got all these guys together in the village there, and then we went out in a skin boat called an umiyak, and that's a big frame boat. Was about 10, 12 of us on board, and it's covered, the frame is covered with walrus hide. And I had really a good gun. I think it was a 270 or something like that. It was with a scope on it. Well, anyway, during that trip, we saw a lot of walrus. The first group of walrus we saw was on this ice floe, and it was pretty well covered with the walruses. There was about 10 or 15 of them, and we didn't get a single one of them. And so I told the Eskimos, I said, how can you kill one of those? And he says, you got to hit it just exactly about 6 inches behind the ear hole, or you're not going to, it'll go down and repair itself in the ocean, and you won't get it. So you don't shoot it in the heart or in the body or anything. And so anyway, so the next group that we snuck up on them by turning the motor off and paddling very carefully as we got closer. And I was so close to that one of the walruses that I had to decide. The whole thing was in the scope, and I had to decide where I wanted to shoot it even. And so I put it right where it belonged and got it in just one shot. Well, anyway, and then it sunk. And they used grappling hooks to drag the bottom of the ocean and bring it back up. and then we used a come along. I call it a come along because we use it in farming to stretch the barbed wire fence when you're making building fence. Well, they had those, and they used that to get that walrus to come up on the ice floe. And they gave me a hatchet, and my job was to cut a runway, and we dragged that walrus up on top. I did not comprehend how massive the walrus was. It was just massive. I mean, when we got it all the way up onto the ice floe, and I was standing there right beside it, it was about here, just the stomach. They weigh between 2,500 and 3,000 pounds for a walrus. And as soon as they got it out, we got up the runway, and as soon as they got it out, they whip out their knives, and they skin that thing, and cut it up into chunks about 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet chunks that they then put in the boat, in the skin boat. And they keep the walrus nose. That's just the nose of the walrus up there. With that's the actual walrus that I killed. And they cook out all of the flesh and the meat and everything. And that's the nose and the upper maxilla, the front of the maxilla of the walrus. And I brought it back and mounted it out here. Well, on our way back, we got the ice flow in to the boat, and we had to get out of the boat and drag it across some of those big ice floes that are because they're too wide. We couldn't get through. I have a picture of it from the air of one like that, where the current makes it so that those ice floes go all together, and we got trapped inside that, and we were dragging that boat, trying to get it across. You had to, when you're dragging it, you had to hold on. If you didn't hold on, sometimes, a couple of times, the whole boat and all of us men went under. Because if you didn't hold on, you would never come up. You would only go under one time because the ice flows right over top of you. And so as soon as you start to go down, you just peel over real quick into the boat, and then the whole thing will bob up and down in the crushed ice that caused you to go down. You've got thin ice. And so then you drag the boat back up on the ice floe and go until then eventually you can put the motor back in and go. And we were all night trying to get out of that area, and finally got out, and the next morning go catch the airplane to go back home. But that is the keepsake of that walrus hunt, which I was on 2 or 3. By that time they had, I think it was 4 or 5 seal and 2 or 3 ugruk. And the ugruk is a big, giant, bearded type seal. And they are all good eating for the Eskimos. They use everything. Even the entrails, they clean them out and cut them up and make soup and things. And seal oil is the main thing they put on any kinds of vegetables or greens, is seal oil. We had a young boy that we brought in to take care of because he was caught robbing in Nome there. He was robbing the different stores, and we were asked to do some help, and we took him in for quite a few months. His name was Okpialik, and he was really good with Chad and you, Todd. He was really good, taking care of you and little Daphne when she was born. And he had to have his seal oil. So we had to get some and put it in the fridge because he was putting it on everything. They were so used to the seal oil, and they grew up with it, so giving it a special taste. But anyway, that was our trip out to St. Lawrence Island to do the. You know, it's interesting too. While we were in Nome, I got a letter that the church sent me from Salt Lake, and it was a military man who was on St. Lawrence Island that was his station, and he was asking, "What about this church? What's it like? And what do you do?" He said, "My wife is receiving the lessons in California, and she wants to join that church and your church." And so anyway, the Salt Lake sent me the letter. Can you help us do something? And so I organized missionary lessons because I was a returned missionary. I organized the lessons and sent them out to him with 2 or 3 books, like the Book of Mormon. I sent that. What was the
Marvelous Work of the Wonder.
Marvelous Work and a Wonder? That was the main one. And anyway, I had 3 books that I sent with the lessons, and I send the lessons every 2 weeks. And I says, "Hey, you know, and here's the exams, and it's open book. You can get the answer." And anyway, I bore my testimony. He was ready to join the church, but the ocean was frozen over. And so when I went out and got onto that island, this was before the walrus hunt, we went to lunch together. He got me on base there on St. Lawrence Island, and we talked about the church, and we talked about how he could get baptized, and we left it with, as soon as he gets released, he was going back to California to join the church because he was already converted and living the gospel, and he was very excited about it because his young wife was already baptized in California. So, and I never heard from him after that, but it was a good experience in doing some missionary work while we were in the military.